Welcome back to our third flight of Oregon and Willamette Valley exploration. In this flight, what we're going to do is consider the rest of the AVAs, or as many that we can get to, sub-AVAs of the Willamette Valley, and again, try and link them into the flavors of the wine. And then we're just going to take a brief moment also to think about how wine producers matter and how they can influence the decisions and flavors of the wine. So we'll cover that all in this final flight. Now, what I wanted to do is take us from Yamhill Carlton, add on another AVA right here, which is McMinnville. And then there is, I think, going to be an AVA that's not quite added yet, but will come soon below McMinnville, which is Van Duzer, and it would be the Van Duzer Corridor. And I wanted to taste this first wine and reflect on the Van Duzer Corridor and McMinnville related to the wines, and then also take us through this final flight using that as an explanation. So if we go ahead and taste the first wine of this flight, which is Van Duzer Pinot Noir, I think one of the things you can notice is that it has a real lively fruit character and also a really wonderful spice to it. Now, of course, those are my impressions, and you can decide what you think, but I think it's noticeably different than the others in that smell. If you will, a fresh spice character, like a baking spice character to it. And then when you have it on the palate, to me, I think it's noticeably great tension, seamless acidity through it. It's very fresh and very lively. And frankly, it's probably one of the most acidic ones that we have in this set of wines that we're tasting. So the question is, why is that? And what I would say to you is I think it links to the geography and the AVAs and links to them very dramatically and also gives rise to the name of this winery. Now, the Van Duzer Corridor is actually not first a wine term, but it's a geographical term. And the reason is it's actually a corridor that breaks the coastal mountain range and has just a shot out to the Pacific. It's a great and stunning place to go hiking. And if you're a really strong hiker, you can hike all the way from the valley out to the Pacific going down the corridor. What that means, though, is that it also gives a very clear entrance point for the cool Pacific to have a dramatic influence on the area. So the Pacific this far north is really cold, and all of that cold ocean air can flow right down the Van Duzer Corridor and end up in this area of the Willamette Valley. Well, so what does that mean for our wines? It means that as Willamette Valley itself is a cool area, now you have one of the coldest areas within the valley. So it's definitely an interesting place to grow, and I think it's also why you didn't see many producers opting over to the Van Duzer Corridor in the early years of the Willamette industry. On the other hand, there have been, like Van Duzer, producers that see a real beauty in having that even cooler style of wines, even cooler style of Pinot Noir, which I think is really reflected here. Meaning that the fruit is light and bright and fresh, and it also gives you the spice character of the Pinot Noir grape. So yet one more climactic influence that we can experience in Oregon. Now in contrast, and this is definitely a flight of contrast, I wanted to take you to Penner Ash. And Penner Ash is actually right here, and it's tucked up on top of there. It's tucked up on top of the Yamhill Carlton, and it's Ribbon Ridge, which I suppose they wouldn't want me to say this, which is, you could say, part of the larger cluster of the Chehalem Mountain District. So Ribbon Ridge, a smaller part of it. Now, with Ribbon Ridge, you have a push-up, so it's a ridge, of all marine sedimentary soil type. And it's extremely noticeable if you go digging in vineyards up there. And I think with that, this has always been, and Lynn Penner Ash's work has always been to me, the exemplar of powerfully built Pinot Noir, but also, or I should say, a real she builds them very powerful, but a real exemplar of that marine sedimentary soil type. Meaning you get loads of black cherry fruit on the nose. I think you also get black tea character and cola. Doesn't taste to me anything like, even though it's very close by, the Bergstrom Cumberland Reserve that we had just a flight ago. Then, when you have it on the palate, I think it really shows off those marine sedimentary soils as well, giving you much bigger tannins, real kind of muscular feel to Pinot Noir. You know, again, I would say that we're working in kind of a very, not limited, excuse me, we're working within a field range. So I'm not saying that this is tasting like, again, California Cab or Bordeaux, but I think from our difference of Van Duzer being our kind of light, bright top one to this one being our big, powerful one, there's a real kind of contrast there. And I think it's wonderful to explore them. Now, with that contrast, we've been talking about soil and climate, but one thing we haven't yet mentioned is the role of the winemaker in making these wines. So I'm going to take you through the next wine of this flight and taste that one, related to soil again, but then go back to these two, Penner Ash and Evesham Wood, and talk about winemaking expressions and differences. So if we just take a look at Evesham Wood, it is our example of an area that is the Eola Amity Hills. And they are right, I should put them on the right side of the river, Eola Amity. Now, they are actually the furthest south of Willamette Valley sub-AVAs. And if you're going to go there, they're actually a bit of a drive because you got to take country roads. So taking country roads, they're about 30 minutes south of the other AVAs. So a bit of a difference to get down there. Now, the Eola Amity Hills are mostly an outcropping based on a lava flow. So they are the basalt soil type. But they also are the area that is extremely influenced by the Van Duzer corridor as well. Because of their orientation to the south, that is actually almost directly in line. Of course, my map is totally to scale, but that is directly in line with the Eola Amity Hills. So that means the Eola Amity Hills are a fairly cool, or get that cooling influence as well. But because they're a little more south, they're slightly warmer, and so it's get higher peaks of warmth during the day. So it's a very strong, interesting place to grow Pinot Noir. One of the things I often think about Eola Amity Hill Pinot is that you can develop fairly strong tannins and fairly powerful acids because you get that long hang time of the influence of the Van Duzer corridor. But you can also get fairly ripe fruit out of the wines as well. So to me, the Eola Amity corridor oftentimes gives us the most gutsy of Oregon Pinots. Now, let's taste this Evesham Wood and think about it and see what we think. Now here, I think there's beautiful, bright strawberry fruit character, has a little bit of savory rose hip going on. And I think both of those things you could totally associate with the basalt character of the Eola Amity foothill, or the Eola Amity AVA. And then on the palate, I think what you can feel is this really vibrant freshness and just an absolute pull on the palate of giving it vivacity. I don't feel like it has a big buildup of tannins, though. I feel like it's more fresh in its acid character. Indeed, I actually feel like the Penner Ash is a bit more full and muscular in its tannin character than what you get out of Evesham Wood. So here, I think what that means, and I hope that you can do these two as a flight, or these three, but definitely these two as a flight, is we have the entrance of the role of the winemaker. Now, both of these two have a very wonderful past, and they're incredibly skilled winemakers. Lynn Penner-Ash, who founded Penner-Ash, she eventually sold it, but she's still making wine there. Lynn Penner-Ash actually started in the Oregon wine industry early, and she went through a series of head winemaker jobs, each one being incredibly successful until she and her husband decided to found their own thing with the Penner-Ash winery labeled and winery that you see here today. Now, when I've tasted through her career, including stints at Rex Hill and other wineries, I've always felt that she makes fairly broad wines with a little bit more concentration and a little bit deeper fruit flavors. I've actually met her and talked to her, but I've never talked to her about David Adelsheim's thoughts that we had in the first flight versus this. But I think what she would say is that she wants the Pinots to taste like what she's made. Fuller and rounder, and also with bigger mouthfeel and a little bit darker fruit character. Again, not outside of what the Oregon winemaking idea would be, but kind of on one end of the spectrum for it. And I've always appreciated her for that. I also think she chooses to use more new oak to these wines, and that gives them a little bit more oaky spiciness and broadness on the palate. You can always see in her wines as well that they're just a notch higher in alcohol than others. This one is coming in at 14.1, which is, again, I think perfectly reasonable, but just another way to show off a winemaking difference. She's harvesting just a little bit riper. Now, I actually put these two side by side because Evesham Wood to me is the exact opposite. And again, I don't know that the winemaker and owner of Evesham Wood has talked to Lynn Penner-Ash, but I have talked to him, and he is of we could say, the other extreme of winemaking styles. I remember talking to him about the 2013 vintage, the one that I described as kind of horrific because the rains came too early. And what he said to me was, actually, I loved that vintage because I felt like my grapes were perfectly ripe when I went to pick them, and I picked them before the rain, and then it rained and we just did all the winery work inside, no problem. So he's actually picking fairly early, and that's always been his school of thought, is to pick fairly early. And indeed, with this wine, you can see it in the alcohol. This is only 13% alcohol, and sometimes he's lower than that. So it's definitely a stylistic choice on how you make these wines. Now, for me, it's fascinating because I would say that with Lynn Penner-Ash, if we think that marine sedimentary soils give a bigger wine with more black fruit character and tea, I would say she's doing a real ideal job of matching her winemaking with the site, that her winemaking is a bit broader, bit bigger style. With Evesham Wood, the basalt soil type and the coolness of the Van Duzer Gap, I would say that he's also doing an ideal job matching the soil with the area of the wine, matching the soil and the geography with the flavor and profile of his winemaking. With that, I know this was a short flight, but it'll wrap up our discussion of Willamette Valley and the pioneers of Willamette Valley. I'd say two things. We haven't tasted much from the two valleys below, or we haven't tasted anything here from the two valleys below, Umpqua and Brogue. They have fascinating wines going on. They are of a different weather pattern and often substantially warmer. And so I wanted to focus on what most people know about Oregon, which is Pinot Noir and the pioneers of Pinot Noir. The final thing I would say is Oregon, if you're into wine tourism, and Willamette Valley especially, is a wonderful and beautiful place to visit. The wine industry starts all of about 45 minutes from the airport. So if you just take a rental car from the airport, you're going to be in the wine, region almost immediately. The other thing is it's still a region where you get that sense of community, that sense of passion, and it comes through in the fact that almost always, not always, but a lot of times when you're at the tasting rooms, you might actually have someone who owns the winery or makes the wines being able to taste them with you. So I'd encourage you to continue your exploration of Willamette Valley and Oregon.